Good afternoon, everybody that's in the same time zone as me. Welcome to this trunk show, which we're doing as part of the Tour de Fabric this year, 2025, of course. And I have three wonderful panelists here with me who are going to be introducing themselves and showing you examples of their amazing work. Just so much fun. The three of them are Amber, Sam, and Claudia, and that's the order that they're going to be talking in. And I'm not going to do much of an introduction because they are going to introduce themselves. So without further ado, I'm going to start sharing. Here we go. And I introduce you to Amber Hebert.
Hello, everyone. And I am going to do a little bit of a correction here. It's the last name is pronounced Abear because I am from South Louisiana and a little bit of French history there. And so you can see on this first slide, the picture is myself and Mum. That's what I call her. And so that's Jennifer. And so we are sort of in business together. We do lots of, oh, no worries. We do quilting together. She does t-shirt quilts. We have a lot of t-shirt quilting on our YouTube channel, and I do a lot of collage quilting. And so I will start off with Allie here in the picture as well. This is Allie Gator. She is sort of our mascot. I started putting alligators in all of my quilts probably about 6 or 7 years ago, somewhere around there, and have since I started actually just putting the alligator in Louisiana themed quilts, and then it came to be that now I put alligators in all quilts. And so this is Allie. Welcome, everyone. Say hello to Allie. Her pattern is available. She's a collage quilted um, pattern, and she is available on my website at thecheekyquilters.com. So I'm going to move on to something that, so if you watched my workshop in the Tour de Fabric, you may know that I presented on t-shirt quilts. My mom and I talk a lot about t-shirt quilts, but my personal passion is road signs. I don't know why I want to turn road signs into quilts. It's a thing I started a few years ago, and this was actually the very first road sign that I did. And this was a couple of years ago. I was driving in South Louisiana, and I was trying to rebrand the Cheeky Quilters, and I want it to be very South Louisiana. I love the land that I come from physically. I think it's just absolutely beautiful here. And so Forked Island is how we pronounce that. So this is a road sign on the way to Pecan Island. The first one is Forked Island, next Pecan Island. I was on my way down there, and it is like on the coast at the Gulf Coast. I saw this sign and I thought that would be kind of cool. So I took a picture of it and I made it into the wall hanging quilt you see there on the other side of the slide, and absolutely loved doing it. And so from there, I have branched out. This quilt was applique. Um, Someone called it scraplicade. I'm not sure if that's coined somewhere else. Um, but anyway, so I was looking at rebranding. So I'm driving to Pecan Island, which is about an hour from my house. So I'm driving south. I'm looking at the trees. I'm looking at all of the beautiful landscape, the Gulf and the marshes. And as I'm doing this, an alligator, probably not too big one, 5 or 6 footer, runs across the road in front of me as I'm appreciating all of my Louisiana. And so I just thought that was absolutely the best thing to have happen. And so as you can see on the bottom of the quilt underneath the 30, excuse me, you can see the little alligator there. I'm just gonna call all of the alligators Allie. Some of them might be boys. I have done a Barry pattern, but Yeah, so this is the very first one that I did, and I was surprised that this one. We go to markets and we sell quilts and we sell other quilted items, and I was really surprised that this one didn't sell at the first market we took it to. There is also a third community in this area called Cow Island. So we call them the islands in South Louisiana, and lots of people from this very tiny little community came up and was like, "Why don't you have Cow Island on the sign?" And so this year, for that same market, I'm gonna have to make one that says Cow Island. So this was my very first road sign quilt, inspiration to reality. It was so much fun to make. And so I have actually changed the way I make them from now since then, but I just love this quilt. It makes my heart warm every time I look at it because I think about that alligator crossing the road that day. Okay, so inspiration sign, um, Grand Isle is also another area in South Louisiana that lots of people go to, and this sign, I was actually looking, the inspiration for this was I knew I wanted to make something that was uniquely Louisiana. And so I was looking for Grand Isle road signs, and I came upon this sign. I know what the sign is supposed to look like. I saw it at different angles, but this was the best shot I could get of it. That post is down the center, so I sort of had to figure it out from there. So what I do is when I get this picture, this sign, this inspiration, I go into the Adobe, not Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and I create basically a map, a pattern for the sign, and so that's just kind of what I did here. Now, the story behind this quilt, you'll see on the right side, the final product. I have lots of little alligators in the water. I have some grass. I have the signs. The guy that you can see with the dark colored shirt, there's two men holding the sign. I cut them out so you can see the quilt a little bit better. But the man who bought the quilt bought it for his father, who was the guy in the gray shirt. And it turns out that after a strong storm, I don't know if it was a hurricane or just what happened, but he was driving along and apparently the sign fell and he picked it up and he owns this sign or one similar to it. And so as soon as he saw my quilt, he really didn't care how much it cost. He wanted it. And he bought it for his dad. So I thought that was really cool. Now I don't know if that was the truth or not, but I'm gonna go with it. I want it to be true, so I'm gonna stick to it. And that last name on the bottom, just for those of you who aren't familiar with this part of the world, that is pronounced Fouchon. So it's Fourchon, but it's pronounced Fouchon. So I want to hear everybody saying it out there. Fouchon. So Grand Isle, Golden Meadow, and Fouchon in South Louisiana. Love this one. Sold it as soon as I put it up. There's another town in this area that's called Cocodrie, which is the word in Cajun French that we use for alligator. And so it's another town on the Gulf Coast. And so that is absolutely on my list of things to quilts to make, road signs, and I am going to be making that one pretty soon. I've already got the pattern done. I just haven't made it yet. Okay. I absolutely love this one. Again, being from South Louisiana, there are hurricanes all over the place. I've lived through quite a few hurricanes in my life. Once upon a time, I was in school at LSU in Baton Rouge, and there was a gentleman there from out of state, and we had a hurricane coming, and I was not panicked about it. And he was like, "Have you even ever been through one of these?" And I was like, "All the time, no big deal." Some are worse than others, not to minimize any destruction anywhere, but where I am, we get a lot of wind, not a lot of destruction. So don't want to minimize it. But anyway, love the hurricane sign. I made this one. I just finished it recently. I debated on how I wanted to do the sign, and I'm actually going to make this one again. I love the way it turned out. I do want to change a couple of things about it though before I make it a pattern. Oh yeah, Laplace. So the brown and gray behind the hurricane evacuation route sign is meant to be a tree, kind of pixelated. But I realized after I made it and I'm looking at it, and this quilt is a throw size, so it's about 67, 50, I think it's 60 by 70, something like that. So it's a decent sized throw quilt. Um, I don't like the way the tree looks. I want it to be better pixelated in the back. I want it to look kind of blurry. And then I have a little bit of greenery and then the water. What you can't see from this picture is that the top of the quilt is quilted in circles, and swirls. And so it's meant to be in the wind. And then the bottom is water. So this is water and this is wind. Very exciting. So let's see. I think I'm taking too much time, but here we go. This is uh again a roadside inspiration, trails to byways. Um, those signs by the state of Louisiana are actually copyrighted, so I can't do them exactly as they are. But I did take inspiration from the Trails and Byways sign and put the accordion in the boot series. So that's where I'm moving on to next. So again, you can see love these the accordion, Cajun music in the Louisiana shape. I call it in the boot. This is another in the boot series, kind of moving on from the road signs. This is the Louisiana flag on your left, and I have it here inside the shape of Louisiana, and I absolutely love the way this one turned out. I will be doing more of these, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get a pattern out or not because it's so intricate. But lots of people have intricate patterns, so we'll try it out. And it's a collage quilt. These are all collage quilts. So another couple of in the boot series. Now the one with the red, white, and blue is actually a local flag that we have. It's the Acadian flag, and that's in the kind of south central part of the state. We are, right about where the red and the blue meets at the bottom of that area where I'm from. And this flag represents our area. And I love it. People love it. Usually when I make quilts, I have a pattern, several patterns of this quilt, larger. I put it in the boot and sold it immediately. So I'll be making more of those. I love the way it turns out. What I do, and you can probably see it here, um, is inside the Louisiana, I have a water pattern. Calm Waters, I think, is the quilting pattern. And on the outside, I have some fleur-de-lis and some wind. I do have a long arm quilter and it's edge to edge with masking in the middle. Um, so that's the one. And then the duck, of course, because lots of duck hunters in this area. Um, I love the way this duck turned out. I actually have two ducks. One is just the duck and one is the duck in the boot. So I figured I'd keep that one. So I would love for you guys to let me know um what kind of road signs you would like to see. I really would love to do the tube in London, and I have lots of ideas to do in the Louisiana boot. The next quilt, actually, I have done. I don't have it on a slide because it's a secret, but I'll tell you guys my secret. We have an alligator crossing road sign. The next one is a cow. But anyway, I would love to hear from you guys, either on my website or on my YouTube channel about what kind of road signs you love, what you would like to see, and if you want patterns of these things, or if you just want me to sort of keep doing my thing and selling them. Anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Amber, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. Lots of very enthusiastic comments in the chat. But let's hand over now to Sam, who's going to take over from Amber. Thank you.
Almost got there. Okay, this is me here. Hi, I'm Sam Alberts. I am a presenter, a YouTuber, and a teacher, primarily a long arm teacher. I began my presenting journey in 2020, but that came to a bit of a grinding halt fairly quickly. So I quickly transferred over to YouTube and figured out all that technology that goes on along with that, and then started building online courses. So most of my courses like surround and my YouTube channel go around long arm quilting, but I did spend a lot of time on my domestic machine, as you can see. It was a lot of time, about 10 years or so on my domestic machine. So most of the things that I speak about, whether it's during my class at the Tour de Fabric or even just on my YouTube channel and things, lots of the design elements can be directly transferred to what you might want to do on a domestic machine. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. And this is also a picture of my first quilt. I don't come from a background of quilters or crafters or anything really. Oh, and also I'm from Canada. I'm from British Columbia. I live in Grand Forks, BC, just as a heads up there. And yeah, so I just got a sewing machine for Christmas one year from my mother because I was going to make clothes for my kids, but it didn't really work out very well. And this sewing machine just sat on the dining room table, and eventually my husband told me it was time to like do something with this machine or get rid of it. So I cut up some fabric and I pieced it back together and just created like an all-consuming monster of a hobby. Like this quilting thing just took over my whole life, and I just kept at it doing everything I could to eventually build myself up to a long arm quilt. Um, Now, I do run a full-time quilting studio alongside my YouTube channel and my presenting, and so I'm full-time in my studio, and I've been working with some pretty awesome quilters to get some quilts into some bigger shows in the last couple of years, and I'm really proud of. So in 2022, I got to work with Brandy Malowski, who is the Quilter on Fire podcast. If you've never listened to her, it's a great podcast. This was the big fib. So Brandy made the quilt and gave it to me, and I did my long arm quilting on it. As you can see, my style is kind of like a mixture of ruler work quilting, free motion quilting. You know, I like to combine geometric with the free motion. It always looks the best. That's how I teach it. I also worked with Karen Watts. Now, Karen Watts is from New Mexico. She sent this quilt all the way up to me here in Canada, and she was actually inspired by her trip to Alaska. So this is called Song of Alaska. This quilt went to Daytona Beach in 2024, and it won third place in its category. And then it went to Paducah also in 2024 and won first in its category, which was small wall quilts. I took a lot of inspiration from Karen's applique here to and transferred it over into the ghost quilting that you can see kind of on the right hand side here. So you can see that there's a feather just off this eagle in the middle. So I took an echo of that and made a template and brought that feather into my ghost quilting, and that's what really inspired me. I find it really awesome working with other quilters because you kind of get to feed off their energy and build something kind of on top of what they've already started. So you're not always starting from scratch every single time. Moving on. So this was another quilt that also went to a show in 2024. I worked with my client Barbara from Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. This went to Quilt Canada in 2024. It didn't place, but it was still really cool to see it hanging there. This quilt is made from a pattern by Juicy Juice, I think, and Allison Glass. I don't know if she participated in this one or not, but it was like these little tiny blocks. There's a video on YouTube that I have of me quilting this quilt, and I swear, like some of those pieces are smaller than a dime. I just could not believe how tiny this little pieces of this quilt were, but it was really cool to work with, and just again trying to build up around other people's ideas. And finally, this year, I worked with Peter Bryan from Toronto, Canada. He's a fairly well-known quilter. He had a lot to do with the last couple quilt cons. But this one went to Quilt Canada in 2025. It was a QuiltCon reject this year, but maybe not next year. And it won second place in its category, which was modern quilts. The picture, I couldn't find a really good picture for today's presentation, so you can't see all the detail in the quilting, but I'll just tell you, it was awesome. It was really intense and very cool. And I think Peter actually does do classes about his quilting techniques and different things, but it was really fun to work with Peter on this. But today I just wanted to quickly go over about long arm samplers. I just wanted to give an idea to maybe some quilters out there who maybe are still working on their skills or aren't, they get kind of lost on what they want to quilt or even what they know how to quilt. And I want to throw out this idea of maybe making yourself a long arm sampler or a quilted sampler piece of some sort. So what could that possibly be? What I'm talking about is if you think about like a sampler quilt, you think about different quilting techniques or trying out something that's new to you. And that's what I want to put forward for, making yourself a piece of fabric that you can look at and be like, oh, I'm actually not too bad at, these types of pebbles or something like that. So ideas for making something like this could maybe start with just using a printed panel. These Dream Big panels were like really huge a couple years ago. And I think that working on something like that, it's a really cost-effective way to get into just trying some ideas, just kind of throwing up everything you can think of onto a piece of fabric. That's what I did with this one. Now, when I look at this particular Dream Big panel, I absolutely hate it because I did it so many years ago. But it's like we're our own worst critics. And it's really nice to see this piece because I know how much further I've come since then. And that's another reason why I try to make something like this every couple years so I can see my own progress and kind of show it off a little bit, like this is where I started and this is where I am now. Another great way to do this is maybe with some cheater quilts using, some pre-print, again, a pre-printed panel, but more in a quilt block formation. This is one that I personally do have. I do have a whole YouTube series on how I quilted this 2 different ways. So it's kind of a neat way to do it. But you can find all different types of cheater quilts. I know Honest Fabrics has them. You can get them from Spoonflower. They're all over the place. So look for, then they're called cheater quilts. So give a look for one of those if you want to try some ideas without having to make an entire quilt. Another idea is maybe to work on some smaller wall hangings. This is called Stitch Happens, I think is the name of this pattern because I know somebody's going to want it. But I just kind of took this, and this was the second sort of, you know, um, sampler that I made for myself. And I just kind of broke out of the box a little bit more than what I did with that Dream Big panel. You can see I'm just kind of going outside of the piecework and then working inside of the piecework. I've got some feathers, some ruler work. I just kind of decided to give a whole bunch of different ideas a try and see what happened. And it happened really good. It came out really, really well. So I really do like this one still. I like this one better than the last one. So, but working on smaller wall hangings. This is my most recent one. We did see a picture of that a little bit earlier, and I haven't really put this out there a lot, but I was playing with maybe more grid work here. You can see the grid work kind of in the background. I was also playing with feathers and things like that. Sorry, I was playing with some feathers, and I was also playing with ideas on these paper piece points, which is one of the sort of Zoom presentations and in-person presentations I do, is like how to quilt these complex paper pieced quilts. So I was just trying to develop more ideas and more things that we can do instead of just dot to dot quilting all the time. I'm trying to move quick here. I forgot to start my timer. So another way to work on maybe some ideas or building yourself, something you can look at that, has a bunch of different thoughts into it is like working on scrappy quilts. Scrappy quilts can also be a good idea. Oh, 4 minutes left. Okay. Scrappy quilts can also be a really good idea because you don't always have to be perfect on a scrappy quilt. On this particular one, clearly I was doing the long arming thing. But if you just had a regular scrappy quilt, you could adjust from like a swirl idea into a stipply idea, into a feathery idea without, having too much of it showing all the time, because lots of the stitch work usually gets lost, and you can kind of just meander and play with different ideas on a scrappy quilt, maybe that you're going to be donating to charity or something. if you don't want to look at it for a really long time, if you don't want to hang it on your wall as an idea thing. So work on a scrappy quilt and get those ideas out of you. Also on my YouTube channel last year, I did this thing where I just spun this wheel and it had a whole bunch of random fillers on it. And I just to get me outside of my pebble box. I do a lot of pebbles. So I wanted to give some other ideas a shot. And this was a great way. It just really forced me out of my box. And I did a whole big quilt on frames and fillers. And it's really nice to look at sometimes when I'm looking for ideas on what can I quilt on this quilt. Now, you don't always have to build yourself a spinny wheel like this. You could just come up with maybe 6 designs that you wanted to give a shot, and you could just roll the dice one day, and just go with that one. Or you could put a whole bunch of ideas into a hat and just pull one out and say, oh, I guess I'm quilting, like a teardrop echo today, and give that a shot. And just to kind of force yourself to try new things, because we really can get into these ruts. And as just a last sort of little tip I have for you, if you're really not willing to sort of do a quilt or a cheater panel or anything like that yet, layer your practice pieces. And what I mean by this, if you do have a long arm machine, you're going to mount your backing, mount your batting, mount your top, your practice piece of fabric, quilt it away, and then instead of like mounting another piece, just take an old sheet, toss it on top of what you just quilted, and keep quilting. You could do this on your domestic too. You could make your quilt sandwich, whatever size you're working with, 12 by 12 inches, quilt it, take a look at it, and then throw another 12 by 12 piece on top of that. So you don't necessarily need another piece of batting or another piece of backing. You could probably do it 2 layers on a domestic and probably 3 layers on your long arm. So that's my last little tip for you today. Thank you so much for having me. I was so happy to be a part of this tour de fabric. It's so much fun. I'm going to read through the questions. I was just talking a little bit too fast here. I get kind of fired up when I talk about this stuff. And that's my little puppy Rhino.
Oh, isn't he cute? I know I have a question, which
Yeah.
is, was all this freehand or are you using rulers? You mentioned templates at one point. How does that work?
So I do use ruler work quilting. I use mostly straight rulers and curved rulers for most of my work. And then I also use templates that I draw myself. So kind of like printed off the computer. Right now on my YouTube channel, I'm doing a whole series on ghost quilting. And the first video kind of talks about how to make a template to put onto your quilt so you could do that ghost quilting like I did with that feather in the Song of Alaska quilt.
Yeah, because I
So,
must admit, I haven't heard that term before, the ghost quilting term.
oh
Is
yeah,
it
it's a
quilting
really
in
cool
the,
technique.
yeah, is it in the empty space?
Yeah, it's kind of like what I define ghost quilting as a recognizable shape in silhouette form. So a
Oh,
fairy, as long as you could recognize it in a silhouetted form, that is ghost quilting. It's not necessarily a quilted motif, which is a bunch of feathers and shapes. It's a recognizable fairy or a dog, or a motorcycle.
mm.
Something recognizable.
Well, now I know what to ask you to do a workshop on in the future. So that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, my fellow San Francisco Quilt Guild member, we co-chaired a quilt show committee together, which we're both still recovering from, even though it was more than 2 years ago. But very happy to have Claudia here with us, and she's going to wow you all with her quilt. So over to you, Claudia.
Thank you, Alex. I'm sorry, B.
Sorry.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here to share my work. You can contact me at Claudia Shear Quilts and under the same name on Instagram, Claudia Shear Quilts. And my email is right there. So if you have any questions after this presentation, I would be happy to talk to you. I wrote down notes, guys, because I am very ambitious on what I want to cover in 14 minutes. So you might have to shout out if you have a question. Um, A little bit about me. I'm a quilt maker and textile artist. I live in San Francisco. I'm a Bay Area native, and I've been sewing quilts for about 20 years. Um, Two words to describe my work would be improv and modern. And I primarily make quilts to hang in shows, local, national, and international. I currently have a show with a joint show with my sister Laura Ryle up in San Francisco, and it's kind of a retrospective of our work. And I have about 20 pieces hanging on the walls. And if you're interested in seeing, if you're in the Bay Area, if you're interested in seeing the show, just please reach out to me. I also teach classes primarily on improv techniques to guilds, and I also lecture to guilds. Let's see. Let's go on. Um, so I'm going to start off with a series of quilts that are based on stripes. I've made a lot of quilts based on stripes. This is my most current finished quilt that I wanted to complete for my show. It's called Prismascape. Um, so I'd actually sewn together the elements, the stripes for this quilt um, many years ago. They sat in a box until I felt inspired enough to sew them together. And I don't use templates and I don't use rollers, so it's all done freehand with a rotary cutter. And I alternated cottons with Dupioni silk. You'll see in my presentation that I'm very inspired by color. And let's see, I also really love texture and I like the added texture that the silk adds. I free motion quilted this myself on my domestic machine. Here's another quilt that's also a combination of Dupioni silk and quilting cottons. And the way it came about is that I had some leftover pieces that didn't make it into Prismascape. I had some leftover pieces from another project and they were sitting on my cutting table and I threw them together in a quilt. LA Stripes was inspired by a trip I took to LA. I kind of want to capture some of those experiences I had there, and I was interested in the landscape and the quality of light, which is different from San Francisco. And I took really long strips of fabric to make the stripes, and I used some high contrast white and dark pieces to really, enhance the design and give it some pop. I also experimented with having the stripes and the lines kind of overlap each other. This quilt was juried into QuiltCon, Pacific International Quilt Show, and was included in an invitational exhibit called Through Lines at Quilt Festival Houston just this last year. Here are a couple of different ways you can, design with stripes. The quilt on the left is also has silk in it. So basically the quilt on the left, I made stripe sets and then I cut them up. And then when I sewed them back together, I first kind of, I made them so that they were a little offset from one another. So that causes that little zigzag. And then the quilt on the right was the result of a class I took with Maria Schell quite a few years ago. So the next couple of few quilts I wanted to share is a series that I call quarter circles, which are basically a drunkard's path block, but made improv. So I'm not using templates, I'm not using rulers, I'm using my rotary cutter to create the shapes. This is the most current quilt that I made using this technique. It's called Postmodern Jukebox. And I was experimenting with making elongated shapes and also playing with scale. So making big blocks and small blocks within the same quilt. I also teach a class that introduces this technique of cutting and piecing this together, and also how you can design your own quilt using this technique. Okay, the night garden was inspired by nature. I used the shapes to create a rhythmic design, and I used my own hand-dyed fabrics for this quilt. And I used matchstick quilting on my domestic machine. And variegated thread, which gives the quilt the look of rain falling down in a landscape. This quilt was juried into PIQF, QuiltCon, and Quilt Festival Houston. Forest Light was inspired by the cutoffs from the night garden. So whenever you are laying fabrics and cutting it, you end up with all these leftover pieces. And so I took the green pieces left over from night garden to design this quilt. For the background, I used fabrics that I dyed, and I dyed a lot of, I was trying to achieve a gray color, and I came out with nothing consistent at all. And I decided I'll just throw them in the quilt, and it adds extra interest. This is the back of Forest Light. Sometimes I'll throw a kind of freeform design on the back of a quilt because I just don't seem to own a lot of big pieces of yardage for a back. And this quilt was also juried into PIQF, QuiltCon, and Quilt Festival Houston. Super Bloom is the first quilt that started this series using these quarter circle shapes. And I decided one day, I made a couple of blocks. I decided to do some curved piecing. I threw those blocks up on my design wall, and they were probably up there for several months. And I never knew if it was going to become a quilt or not. And finally, one day I decided to make more elements. And the spotted fabric was from a hand printing session. So I decided to throw that fabric in as well. And then I quilted it with free motion with pebbles in the background and lines in the orange pieces. So the last series I'm going to share is called Color Stories. Purple Haze was made right in the darkest days of the pandemic. And actually, this is a low volume quilt that is actually pretty dark, but I had a problem, really had a challenge getting my iPhone to take an accurate photo of this quilt. So this quilt started off as with I was exploring the color purple, and then I kind of quickly realized I actually didn't have a lot of purple fabric. So I went and added more fabrics that kind of had the same value and were close on the color wheel. And I constructed the blocks using a technique where you usually start with a centerpiece and then you piece around that piece. So Purple Haze was juried into QuiltCon and in PIQF, where it won Best Mid-Century Mod Wall Quilt. Radiant is made out of leftovers from some really old quilt projects that I had pieced together, and they ended up in a box. And then finally, I took them out and decided to sew them together. And I had to add more elements to make a complete top, and then I added the skinny silk pieces to kind of draw the whole design together. And it also has some hand stitching on it as well. Fire and Ice looks like a traditional log cabin quilt, but it started out as an improv exploration of the color red and blue. And I had it set out with the explicit intention of making a log cabin quilt, which actually made this quilt very labor intensive ultimately to complete. And while I was constructing the blocks, I realized there was kind of a 3D effect that was happening when you sew the same colors together, but in different values, you can get that 3D effect. So now that I had that in mind, I worked to kind of enhance that effect on the quilt, which is something that happens in improv. Something unexpected happens and then you go with it. Timeout uses basic square shapes, and I wanted a really organic look, so I cut my squares with scissors. And the background fabric is varied because I didn't have enough of one gray fabric to use as the background. And so I kind of played around with using different values based on the color of the block. And so most of the darker blocks, squares have darker gray behind them. And ultimately, I think that makes the quilt more interesting. The Timeout was my first quilt accepted into QuiltCon. And lastly, besides quilts, occasionally I'll make something that's not a quilt. And I was planning on attending QuiltCon in February, and I wanted to have a quilted garment to wear, and I didn't have a lot of time, so I ended up ordering a jeans jacket, and then I was decided I would put something on the back of the quilt that was inspired by something I'd already made, which happened to be the night garden quilt. It actually came together really quickly. It was just a matter of measuring the dimensions of the back and deciding the scale of the blocks. And then I did add batting and I matchstick quilted it all together onto the jacket. And it turned out to be a pretty straightforward process, and it took a lot less time than making a quilt. And I actually really love wearing this quilt around town, and it's a great conversation piece. And to wrap things up, I do teach, I've started teaching workshops to guilds, and it's mostly focused on improv. And I recently taught a class in Santa Cruz, a beginning class called Improv Made Easy, which is really a great introduction to improv and creating quilts without patterns. And I also have two lectures that I provide to guilds, and one is my improv quilting journey, and the other one is all about color and using color in the design of your quilts. Thanks for your time, and please let me know if there are any questions.
Claudia, that was wonderful. Thank you. A long-term fan of your work, so it's amazing to see it all like this. There was one question. Susan asked, any tips on sewing with silk? Let me stop sharing for a moment. There we go. Claudia, any tips on sewing with silk?
Yeah, so a Dupioni silk really has a texture and it's a little bit thicker than a lot of silks. I mean, I wouldn't recommend using a really slippery silk in a quilt. Um, I back it with a really light fusible. And if you don't, it seems like you can quilt without it, but it puckers and you have to back it. And I started working with silk because one of my small groups, some neighbor had given someone in my quilt group a lot of vintage silk, and we just sat around in a circle and we cut pieces out of it. And those few silks have ended up in so many quilts, and I still have a little bit left.
I am one of those quilters that has a stash of silk that I've come across over the years, and it's just in a box, and it's not a big box. And that one day I'm going to make something with it, but yes, that day has yet to come. So yes, well, thank you all so much. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm so glad we recorded it because I know I'm going to want to go back and look at some of these pieces again. Thank you so much to the attendees that joined us here. And this is just the latest of these live events that we're doing as for Tour de Fabric. So make sure you sign up for the other ones, which are all on the Quilt and Learn /live page. So panel, thank you again. And the recording of this will go up very shortly. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.